The first I ever heard of any kind of musical, I don't know, variation or anything like that at a scientific level was clear back in the mid-90s, 1990s. And it was like a 60 minutes type thing or something. I just remember that it struck me as so odd. Well, they were looking at heavy metal music and how it was harmful to the youth and blah, blah, blah. Well, some grape vineyard, I believe it was in California. I'm going off memory, so bear with me. Anyway, they did a little bitty test. And what they did was they grew 2 acres of grapes at this vineyard, separate from all the others, and set up loudspeakers and blared heavy metal music, 24/7, nonstop. And then about 500 yards away, they had a second 2-acre plot. They set up the loudspeakers and they blared classical music 24 hours a day until, the fruit of the grapes produced. And then they examined these grapes. And what they found was the classical music patch, for lack of a better word, acreage, produced far more robust grapes and well-rounded, well filled out, on the vine, way more gooder than the patch, the 2-acre plot that had blared the heavy metal. And that struck me as incredibly interesting. And a bunch of talking heads and scientists blabbered on and said a bunch of words, and what it amounted to is they didn't know. The trouble with that is, I believe we need to know, and here's why. I'm going to read this next part to you because I won't remember all the words and it's brief. So here we go. A 440 hertz, also known as the Stuttgart pitch or musical pitch, corresponds to an audio frequency of 440 hertz, which serves as the tuning standard for the musical note of A above middle C. Now there's been multiple pitches over the course of music production and sound. And Leonard Bernstein, the New York Philharmonic, tuned to 442, what's also called Verdi's A. And this is important. Just hang tight for a minute. Now, historically, they've used 444, 415, 466. Classical music is often pitched in 427, 430. But this 432 is fascinating, as is 440. Now, the so-called conspiracy thing, Joseph Goebbels, who was the minister of propaganda in the Nazi Germany, I gotta do this because there's censorship here. We know this. Okay. So anyway, Goebbels, who was just a maggot, but his whole thing was a lust for power and Satanism and all this other crap. But he pushed hard. He was the minister of propaganda. He installed loudspeakers over all the encampments, all the work camps, and in the public areas at large, and they would blare like what they deemed important meetings from the administration so all the people could hear it. And they blared music, and they blared their version of the quote-unquote news, because he wanted every tool available to him to brainwash the people of Germany to do what they ended up doing. And I would assume we're all familiar with what they ended up doing. But this guy his whole thing was propaganda. Now the story goes that he pushed and pushed hard for standard tuning of A to be at 440 hertz. So we have to ask ourselves, one, is this true? And two, why? In 1936, the American Standard Institution, along with basically the rest of the organized world, adopted 440 hertz as the recognized standard tuning. You had to have a standard of tuning because all the instruments have to be tuned the same. They tune a piano, let's say at 440, and then everybody else in the orchestra would tune to that calibration of A. But what's interesting is, specifically, 442 hertz, it mathematically jives. It works out and supposedly promotes healing. This 440 is disruptive. It's agitative. It causes, we're talking about the subconscious mind here. This dis-ease, medically perhaps, I mean, it's a mystery. Nobody knows. Now, they've asked some of the big shots, science, and follow the science, you got to. They've asked them about this. And they said, well, I don't know anything about that. The whole thing's just preposterous. Is something preposterous simply because you don't know anything about it? Nikola Tesla once said, if you want to know the secrets of the universe, you have to think in terms of energy, vibration, and frequencies. Well, there's a man that ought to know. I did a video on Tesla. I don't know why I always point back there, because there ain't nothing back there but a bunch of stored stuff. But anywho, I did do a video on Tesla. There's just so much information. It's hard to compact that into a little 20-minute deal or whatever it amounted to being. But the man ought to know. If you want a little more in-depth type video, there's about an 11.5-minute video by this guy. And he goes into this way more eloquently and in-depth than I am here. Is it useful information? I believe so. And the reason for that is things are tuned a certain way in nature. And humans tend to emulate nature if they're smart, I believe, anyway. It's kind of like my video on grounding. It's back there in that room. It's not. It's in the history of the channel. If you haven't seen it, you can go back and watch that. These things are important to us. And we wonder, present day, why I'm just not feeling well. Or I got this something, this humming, this agitation, anxiety is getting more and more commonplace. And we wonder why. And we go to our medical professionals, and they give you some petroleum-based pharmaceuticals. Well, that kind of helped, but I just feel like a zombie. And boy, it's this great mystery, isn't it? Or maybe this stuff has been explained. If we just take the time to kind of delve into it and see what the heck's going on. It's just a thought. I'm just throwing stuff out there. But it is fascinating to me. I thank you for watching. I do appreciate your time, and I'll see you next time.